Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I am the director of the Ashland Public Library. And I'm really excited to be here with Mia Manansala, right? Piper Drake, Sarah Echavarre Smith, and Jesse Sutanto, who are here to talk about their heritage as being Southeast Asian and their books. Before we get to them, though, I have a couple of things to say. One is I'd like to thank the Friends of the Ashland Library for supporting all of our programs. I would also like to say that we've collaborated with several libraries to bring this program to you. And so we welcome patrons from the libraries in Canton, Dedham, Lexington, Norwood, Somerville, Tewksbury, Watertown, Westboro, and Sterling. It's always so magical to me for libraries to work together to bring fun programs to our patrons. So did those things. I'm thinking about all the housekeeping things I have to say. You can buy signed books from any of our authors from Bank Square Books. I will put a link in the chat for that. Please use the chat for any kind of chatter or tech issues, and we'll be using the Q&A for questions, and I will be taking questions from the audience. You will have to fight with me to get a question in, though, because I have plenty. So without further ado, I'm going to right into some very short introductions so you can meet our authors. Piper is an author of romantic suspense, paranormal romance, science fiction, and fantasy. She's a foodie, a wanderer, and she's usually not lost. So we're good to know. It's good to know that she's in the right place right now. Mia is a writer and a book coach, which I want to hear about. I'm not really sure what that is. It sounds really awesome. From Chicago, who loves books, baking, and badass women. Who doesn't? Sarah is a copywriter turned author who wants to make the world a lovelier place, one kissing story at a time. I love that. She, very much like so many of us, became a romance reader when she found her aunt's stash of romance books when she was 8. And Jessie, who is coming to us from Indonesia, where her family lives, is the author of Dial A for Aunties. There's a couple of books here about aunties, I think. And I just found this out, that it's been bought by Netflix to become a TV show or a movie. Do we know yet?
It should be a movie with Netflix.
Awesome. So exciting. So welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be having this conversation. So I'm just going to get started right away and just ask you to tell us a little bit more about yourself than my, sort of very short and lame introductions. Mia, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So again, I'm Mia P. Manansala. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a Filipino-American author who was born and raised in Chicago. I write the Tita Rosie's Kitchen Mysteries, which are light-hearted, kind of humorous mysteries centered around a family-owned Filipino restaurant in a fictional town just outside of Chicago. The first novel in the series, which is my debut, is Arsenic and Adobo. It came out last May. The second book is Homicide and Halo Halo, which came out this past February. And my newest book, Blackmail in Bibinka, came out October 4th. So that's me.
Okay. So it's a new book. We love new books. Piper.
I always freeze up when it comes to saying a little bit, but at the same time, when we're talking about other things, you can't stop me from talking. So about me, I am a Thai American author. I was born in New York, around the upstate New York area, grew up in New Jersey, and I have lived across the United States in like Maryland, in Phoenix, Arizona, and Seattle, Washington. I also work a day job career in parallel to my author career, and I love them both equally. And so I'm one of those authors that kind of manages both careers in parallel. That's where my ikigai comes from, which is a term we can talk about if anybody's curious about it later. So a lot of my experiences come from just that whole life, wandering around, meeting lots of people. And upcoming, I have written across multiple genres. So I got my start as PJ Schneider in paranormal romance and science fiction romance. And then I'm most well known for my romantic suspense, which doesn't have any paranormal elements, but it does have veterans and second chances and working dogs, because working dogs. And I will promise you, no matter how many dogs show up in my stories, my Piper promise is the dog lives always, because that's very important. But my upcoming series is really special to me because it's a return back to kind of like urban fantasy, contemporary fantasy, paranormal romance. And I have Wings Once Cursed and Bound coming out in April. It's the first of my Mythwoven series, and it features my very first Thai American kinari, which is one of those things where I pulled on mythology from that I grew up hearing about and listening to the stories of from my mother and my grandmother, and seeing on the murals and the walls of Wat Gao during the summers when I was in Thailand. So being able to bring a kinari and Thai mythology and mythology from around the globe into the US and into this world that's kind of an urban fantasy kind of world set in Seattle and the Seattle area, and blending all of that was something that meant a lot to me. So I'm super excited about this series kicking off with Mythwoven. And I've gone too long, so.
Lots of good news though, Piper. Sarah.
Yeah, so hi, I'm so excited to be here. I write sexy rom-coms and romances. My latest release is The Boy with the Bookstore, which is set in Portland, Oregon. I live in Oregon, but I don't live in Portland because it's really expensive, and so I live elsewhere. But that is a cute little sexy romance about Joelle and Max. They live next to each other, or they work next to each other in the same building, and there are renovations in this building. And so they have to share a temporary workspace, and Joelle has always had a crush on Max, but working together sort of brings out the worst in them. So it's sort of like a friends to enemies to lovers, cute little romance with a really, really gushy mushy happily ever after that I'm just always about. But yeah, it's my latest release. I'm Filipino American. My mom immigrated from the Philippines to the United States. Most of her family lives in California. That's where I was born. And then my dad is from Nebraska. So I spent a lot of my life in Nebraska until a handful of years ago when I moved out to Oregon. So yeah, I mostly just write sexy romances. I also write tearjerker women's fiction under the pen name Sarah Echavarre, which is pretty different from like the silly and sexy romances that I crank out. but yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's writing, it's fun, it's cool to be able to incorporate my background in the stories that I tell. That's been a really fun experience.
Mm-hmm. Jessie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Sutanto. I guess I'm most well known as the author of Dial A for Aunties. But my latest book that came out was Well, That Was Unexpected. I am Chinese Indonesian, and I was very excited about Well, That Was Unexpected because it's the first book I've written that is actually set in Indonesia. And that was like unreal. Like it was such a dream come true, because years and years ago I wrote a middle grade fantasy that was set in Indonesia, and all these publishers kept like rejecting it, and a few of them were like very honest and were basically like, no one is gonna want to read a story set in a country like as foreign as Indonesia. So I was like, oh my God, and now it's like a love letter, both to the country and, to the characters. So I'm very happy about that. So I live in Indonesia with, surrounded by a huge and very meddlesome family. Oh my God, sorry, my kids are awake, so it's a bit chaotic. It's 7 a.m, so they're very like, full of energy.
It's keeping you on brand with that large meddlesome family.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah, totally. And I basically just draw all of my material from my ridiculous family. And if any of you like ever read my books and starts thinking like, no, like no family would be like this ridiculous, then I invite you to come to visit me, and I will introduce you to my family, and then you'll be like, oh wow, you actually toned it down for your books. So yeah, that's it.
You know, so many of us probably come from large families, but am I correct in assuming that Mia, Piper, and Sarah, you were born in the US, and Jessie, you were born in Indonesia or China?
Oh, well, I was, I basically was raised in Indonesia and Singapore, actually.
Okay, all right. So because I was just thinking that there might be in some conversation around what's the difference in terms of like being first generation, second generation American, or not even being in the US, which is really interesting. So I'm just going to dive right into my questions because, like I said, I have so many. And like I said, for everybody here, feel free to put questions in the Q&A. I will be paying attention to that. So my first question is, were there any challenges inherent in becoming a writer in terms of having a Southeast Asian heritage? I think there's a lot of stereotypes, and I'd kind of like to, do some stereotype busting with this part of the conversation. I'm going to start with Piper on this one.
Did you see my face? You were asking this. I was like, oh yeah.
Of course.
So I would not give up my writing career to date for anything. It has been a ride. It definitely has. And while there were some challenges and some obstacles, there were also a lot of joy. So please remember that too. But when we're thinking about challenges, right? Like that's the biggest question. I think, I was first published in 2010 under a different pen name, under PJ Schneider. And I was just mentioning to everyone that, I write under a pen name for various reasons, both because I manage a day job career as well as my authoring career, and my day job career is the kind where it would be it's much easier to keep track of everything if they're compartmentalized under two different names, which is one set of decisions. But also my real name, which I don't mind sharing, is Lalana Dararat, and that is very difficult to pronounce consistently, as well as spell or remember to spell. If you meet me in passing, you go, hey, I want to look up her books, or I want to Google search her books, or whichever search engine is your search engine of choice. That name is very difficult to remember on the fly. Not to say, like, honest to goodness, there are arguments to be made, because if we can all remember how to Google Daenerys Targaryen, I think we can also remember how to Google Lalana Dararat or Mia Manansala or Sarah Echavarre Smith or Jessie Q Sutanto, any of those things. But in 2010, that wasn't the conversation. The conversation was, hey, we respect you, but we do advise you that it would be smarter to make yourself more accessible to readers by making yourself more easily searchable. And it was at a time also where if you were planning to write across different genres, so I was being asked to not only switch over from my paranormal romance and my science fiction romance to switching over to writing romantic suspense, which has similar pacing and story beats and kind of excitement and action and feel, but it doesn't have any paranormal elements to it, and it has a different audience. They asked me to change my pen name from PJ Schneider, and so I decided to go with Piper J. Drake, because that way my readers who are coming over with me would still be able to call me PJ, because Piper J. And Drake was one that really came naturally to me because of reasons, right? Like the whole decision process. But during the decision process, I did propose some Thai names that were a little bit easier and more accessible, and they were all shot down as still not accessible enough. So that was one set of challenges. And then including in my books, Asian American characters in general was something that was another challenge, because fortunately I worked with editors who would never say, no, you can't, but they would say, hey, it might be smarter to introduce this couple in a later book in the series after readers are more invested in following along with the series. And the characters that they suggested be introduced later in the series were usually the characters who were people of color. And that was not to say you can't. It's just, if you want a wider audience to be more invested in your series, this might be a savvier choice. And so that was frustrating because on one hand, it's not an obstacle. They're giving me marketing advice. And they're not asking me to compromise who I was or I plan to write, but they were asking me to do it in a strategic way, which, you have to make difficult suggestions. And I know that there are some people that would be turned off knowing that those suggestions were made as I wrote the series, because they would think that I was being disingenuous. And it's still always characters and stories that I intended to write. But the order in which they were introduced in the series was influenced and informed by the time and the discourse and the likelihood that people were open to reading wider and more diversely, and when that was over the course of the 10 years or so that I've been writing. So that was an obstacle as well, and reviewers and how they received my stories was also kind of a ride, because I would have especially early when I first started introducing Asian American characters as lead characters in my romances, I would get reviewers who were like, I'm so tired of these tired Asian stereotypes, because I would write an Asian character with Asian American experiences. And they're like, oh, it's so tired to get that stereotype. I want an Asian American character who breaks out of the stereotype and basically behaves like the default non-POC character instead. And that was frustrating, because the Asian American experience, the Asian diaspora experience, forget it, Asian American, anywhere, the diaspora experience is different and it's not monolithic. Mm-hmm. So every one of those characters is a different experience. And so, yeah, those were some of the obstacles and challenges that I ran into through the course of my books. And I am also certain that I will encounter more, and it's going to be a wild ride.
Continue to be. Sarah. Oh, you're unmuted.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah, that's Piper brought up a lot of really, really good points about what it's like to be an author of color in the publishing industry. And I think for me, one of the challenges that I've encountered is feeling like you have to, and I feel like Piper kind of touched on this a little bit with what she just said, but like feeling like the story that you're telling has to represent every single person in that particular group, even though that's impossible. That's nobody can do that for any group that they belong to. And so I've found that when I started publishing my books, people were overwhelmingly really positive when they reacted to my stories and my characters. But I noticed that some people were very disappointed that I didn't go into like a wider experience, or in my book Faker, the characters are living in Omaha, Nebraska, which is kind of a random place, but that's where I grew up, or not where I grew up, but where I spent college and where I spent my years as a young adult. And I remember a lot of people, not a lot, but some of the criticism was oh, that doesn't sound very realistic, or are there really that many Filipino American people living in Omaha, Nebraska? And yeah, me, because I was living there and my family was, but so it can be very discouraging to know that you feel that pressure, and just to know that you're never going to ever please everyone, because that's just not possible. And it's really, really hard to not let that get you down, because you feel like you're doing a really, really cool, exciting thing. You're writing the story about this character. I read a lot growing up, and I didn't read a lot of Filipino American characters. So I felt really excited to be writing about them, and it still wasn't good enough for some people. So that was a little bit frustrating, but I don't regret how I write my stories and the characters that I developed. I feel really proud of that. But also publishing, as problematic as it is, there's room for everybody, and hopefully there will be room for more authors of color to like tell their story, so that when one comes out with a book, they're not getting bombarded with criticism that they didn't represent everybody in the group. So that's just something that I thought.
Thank you. Jessie?
So for myself, I noticed that, when I was in California and I would tell people, oh, I'm from Singapore or I'm from Indonesia. And they'd be like, oh, did you mean Thailand? Is that in Thailand? Or, or is that in Vietnam? So most people, especially Crazy Rich Asians, like they don't know, they've never heard of Singapore, they've never heard of Indonesia. And I even had an ex-boyfriend who was like, oh yeah, Singapore, it's known for its prostitutes. It's like, what? Like, why would you even say that out loud? Like, and to me, so it was, I felt like I was in a different universe entirely. Like I felt like I had somehow landed in a place where my countries didn't exist. And even when I was kind of, reading a lot of books by Asian Americans, which were wonderful, they were always like from East Asia, so like Chinese American or Taiwanese American, and I felt like I could relate to them, but there was still a barrier, and so I felt very sad that there was such a lack of Southeast Asian representation, and Crazy Rich Asians, like when the movie came out, I watched it and me and my cousins were all like teary-eyed because we were just like, oh my god, like finally we felt so represented. They were showing foods that we grew up eating, and the kind of family and the kind of like slang, because they were speaking, a lot of the characters were speaking Singlish, which is what my cousins and I are most comfortable speaking. And so I was like, oh my god, like it opened the door, I feel, for so many of us from this region of the world. But it really took I feel like it took a lot for us to be able to get to this point. And it took a lot of sacrifice from people, right? Because like the author of Crazy Rich Asians was saying, he really held fast to wanting to see it on the big screen, and all that stuff. So I just feel like it wasn't a fluke that we're here now. It took a lot of sacrifice and hard work from others to get us to this point, and I really hope that we can continue doing that for authors who might be coming coming up behind us.
Oh, that's so nice. Mia? Oh, now we can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Oh, now I can.
Okay. I have another headset, so if this is not loud enough, I can switch out. So just let me know.
Okay.
I have a lot of thoughts about this. I was nodding along to everyone, especially with Sarah talking about the representation. It's a lot of times other BIPOC authors I've talked to like have felt the same, where there is this unrealistic, and it should be it's unfair burden that we feel, not just in making sure we're representing correctly and doing it justice, but also that we are saleable, that our books are actually being bought, because nobody wants to be the example that the publisher points to and be like, oh look, we bought our Asian book and it didn't sell, so clearly people don't want, like, it sounds so ridiculous. Like, I'm sure people in the audience are like, well, why would you, like, that doesn't, like, no, legit, so many people have had that said to them, like, oh, we took a chance on our one Asian fantasy, it didn't do well even though we never marketed it, and so now it's our reason to not pick this up, right? Especially for, so one thing I want to point out is that all of us that I love, all the authors here, we all write genre fiction. We don't write literary fiction. And I want to point that out because usually if you are a BIPOC and or queer and or from some other marginalized identity, it's very common that you are in the literary fiction space and you are writing about your trauma or the immigrant experience, or, you know, publishers are really only interested in our stories if it's us bleeding on the page. And so I write traditional mysteries, right? I'm just sleuth. And so I had another, so Arsenic and Double was my debut, but I had another book before that, which won me some awards. It got me into a mentorship program called Pitch Wars. It got me my first agent, and it never sold. And it got to acquisitions 3 times. I'm not going to get too much into the back, but basically acquisitions is where you got an agent, you even got an editor, but now the editor has convinced the sales team, and the sales team says yes or no based on whether or not they think you're a good investment. And 3 times that sales team said no. One went so far as to tell my agent that traditional mystery is for older white women, and I had no audience and nobody would want my books, and that I should be writing YA instead because YA is where diversity is. This was in 2018, 2019. So change is slow, but it's happening, thankfully. But yeah, it is definitely a lot to get to where you are, and very different expectations based on our backgrounds.
I feel like Piper's going to give herself a head injury from all of the nodding.
There's so much going, like, I'm like, yes, also yes, and also it wasn't that long ago, and yes, some more. Everybody has really good answers to this, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. We can talk about that forever.
Yeah, but it's interesting to me that you all really started talking about your publishing life when I was actually thinking more on a personal level. Like, was there any pushback from your families to say, oh, you want to be a writer? You want to be a romance writer? You want to be a mystery writer? You know, like, whole other topic, right? So I'm just wondering if you got some of that from your own families or communities saying, like, what, you know, and when I talk about stereotypes, I think, you know, doctor, lawyer, you know, whatever that is. So just really quickly, I thought I'd go around and ask if you have any personal pushback for making these choices. Jessie?
Yeah, I totally do. So we have a family business in Jakarta. My family is in property. And so a lot of my cousins are in the company, and so they were like, well, you have to come work for the family business. And so while I was doing that, I was also writing. And of course, writing was always my passion. So I was trapped at the family company. And my dad was always like very concerned. And I think it's very understandable because it took like 10 years for me to get published. And he was always like, stop wasting your time with that, and just, come work like full time and everything. And it was actually only a few weeks ago that my dad said to me, he was like, oh, with your daughters, when it comes time for them to go to college, you better make sure that they major in something useful. And usually when he said this, he would be like, not like you majoring in creative writing. But this time he was like, oh, if they wanted to major in something like writing, or, just something that really invests in like their intellect, because that's something that can never be taken away from you. Like property can go up or down, but your intellect is always going to be there. And so I was like, oh my God, like finally, I have like this nod from my dad. So I'm like, oh, okay. So no more pushback, thank God. Oh.
That's amazing. I feel like I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna move over to Mia.
So I got pushback from my grandparents, but not my parents. So I grew up in a multi-generational household. So I lived with my maternal grandparents, my parents, an older boy cousin, a younger boy cousin, my two little brothers, and sometimes like aunts and uncles and people. I don't know how they knew us, would kind of stay at our house for a little, and before like they, when they immigrated from the Philippines, stay with us, become a little stable before they moved on, started their own household. And so my grandfather was pissed when I became an English major. He was like, "You already speak English. What are you supposed to do with that? Teach?" And I was like, "Yes, because I wanted to be a teacher." And he was like, "There's no money in that. You need to be an accountant like me." Because both of my grandfathers were accountants. That's how my parents met. And I was like, "Absolutely not." But my mom wanted to be an artist growing up. And considering my grandfather was her father, you can guess how that went. Absolutely not. They wanted her to be like a nurse or an accountant. She is terrible at math and she's afraid of needles. So like didn't go very well. So my mom was very supportive. She was basically like, you can do what you want as long as you can take care of yourself. Right. It was like, follow your dreams, but be realistic. It's like, cool, you can be a writer, but do you also have a job? It was one of those things. She's like, I want you to have what you want, but we have no money. So make sure you can take care of yourself. I'm like, fair, right? That's absolutely fair. Mm-hmm. And luckily my middle brother became the nurse in the family, and he married another Filipino nurse. So I'm like, thank you for like, taking that first, so that me and the youngest one can go be our creative selves. But so overall, like they are super, my mom's a page at one of the Chicago public libraries. And before that, she worked at Walden Books when those existed. She's the one who got me into mysteries to begin with. So she loves it. I mean, she's not above criticism because she's still an Asian mom, but the actual act of becoming a writer, there was no pushback there.
Mm-hmm. I think I love your mom. Piper?
Oh boy. So complicated, I think. What ended up happening was I did get a lot of the childhood commentary, like, go be a doctor or a lawyer. We would just want you to study and really have a good, strong future for yourself. So there were a lot of really good intentions, and I was pretty good academically. I would say if there was anything that my parents always sighed over was that I had so much potential, but I didn't do what it took to be number one, because I was satisfied with being in the top 3%. And nationally, like you're satisfied, but like, there's one other person who's going to be valedictorian. And I'm like, you know what? That's okay. And my parents were like, but if you'd just taken the SATs one more time, you would have gotten the highest score in the state. And I'm like, look, I can still get into college with the score that I got, like literally a perfect score in the English portion. Like, so my parents were always like, oh, our child has so much potential. She just doesn't want to be number one. So that was always complicated, but I was very lucky in the fact that my mother imparted on me, I would say, a love of reading and reading voraciously and reading genre fiction in particular. So I got introduced to science fiction and fantasy and mystery and romance, all of that. Like I was that kid in third grade, latchkey kid, right? There were no babysitters. I either like hung out in the library until my mom finished work, or I was at home reading a stack of books that I brought home from the library. And, it's like Terry Brooks, Elfstones of Shannara, like heavy, big, thick boys, like in third grade. Some questionable stuff. Tarl Cabot's Slave Girl of Gore was probably not the best choice for a third grader, but my mom sat down and talked to me and was like, is there anything that you have questions about when it comes to this world building and fantasy? And I was like, well, it's an interesting premise, but I wouldn't want to live there. And she's like, that's fair for a third grader. You're fine. So I was allowed to love reading as long as it was understood that my future should be one, as Mia said, where you can take care of yourself because we don't have that much money and you're the oldest out of this many kids. Right? Like, so it was very practical. So when I progressed forward and I went through undergrad and I paid for my own graduate school and I built this day job career in life sciences and was doing very well, and in fact could turn around and contribute to the college educations for my younger sister, and the paid for my brother's first 3 cars. Let's not talk about how like it was 3 cars in 3 years, right? Like and stuff like that. My parents had no complaints whatsoever about me also building an author career in parallel, because what are they going to say? you're still an overachiever, like they're not going to be upset about that. So my solution to the concern that struggle comes from when parents are just super concerned and they're like, pursue a career that will be useful or will make a lot of money, was just to do it all. Like, why not both? And I kind of have that same attitude towards love triangles. So it's like, why not both? So that's how I handled it.
Love it. How about you, Sarah?
Yeah, so I was really lucky in that I don't ever remember getting a lot of negative pushback from my parents, my mom specifically, because my siblings, I were raised by our mom as a single mom, and she was always just really supportive of whatever it was that we wanted to do, even if it was ridiculous and unrealistic. But she's very realistic too, similar to Piper and Mia's parents. Like, you can do whatever you want, just like don't rely on anyone else to support you. You just have to figure out a way to do what you want to do and pay your bills, because she wasn't somebody who would have bankrolled my life if I wanted to be like a starving writer for the rest of my life. But maybe I was really fortunate because she was somebody who was always really supportive, but also like had a good balance of like realism in that, go for your dreams, but learn how to support yourself.
Nice. So I have like kind of a serious question, and then we can get back into more interesting or like fluffy stuff, because that's what I like. But it sounds like there was, from all of your perspectives, there's some real forward movement has been in Southeast Asian voices being heard in publishing in the last 10, 12 years. And I want to know if you feel like there's been any kind of slowdown in the last few years due to the political climate or the AAPI violence or things like that. So we're not necessarily talking about violence, but just how it's affected publishing or your own, like people's perception of who you are and what you're writing. And I think I'm starting with Mia here.
Really complicated thing for me because, speaking of identity, like I don't quote unquote look Asian. And like I'm not mixed, like I'm Filipino, like my parents are both Filipino, my grand, like, so I mean as like Filipino as like a colonized country can be, but people look at me and I don't fit the idea of Asian, right? So a lot of times, with the whole like Asian, it's this weird dichotomy. And also with like Filipinos, people don't really know what Filipinos are. My books constantly get put on the Latino Hispanic Heritage Month. I have to constantly be like, no, I'm not, let me take up space that doesn't belong to me, because people don't know where to put me. And Filipinos are like a weird liminal space when it comes to Asian and Asian American identity. But I do know other friends who who are more East Asian, who have had some pushback. Like, so, one of my friends who's Taiwanese American, her book got pushed back several times due to the political climate. Once it was like around election time when it was particularly like in 2020, where it was like particularly vitriolic, and they're like, nope. And then, it got pushed back again because they were like, it was like a new wave. Okay. And they're like, well, as a debut, let's not put you during this time where it's extra ugly. And they pushed her back again. So like it for sure has effect. I don't know that necessarily that it's slowed down publishers accepting Asian authored novels, but I do know like in the public there's been thoughts behind the scenes about when to release them or how to market them due to the current climate.
Piper?
Honestly, I think I'm in alignment with Mia on that, in the fact that I haven't heard of, and I haven't experienced pushback in acquisition of stories when they're proposed. I currently am with an agent who would go to bat for me if we were to encounter things like that. I do think that publishing houses, particularly trad publishing houses, are trying to be strategic about when that release is. So I've noticed that my fall release got moved to spring for a multitude of reasons, supply chain being also there. But I'm sure that a little bit of the consideration was also the fact that, you know, it is around the time of Asian AAPI Awareness Month too, in the spring, where there's a lot of promotional opportunities. So am I upset about that? No. I do think that I appreciate the team's concern about when's the best time to position this, but it is frustrating that the climate in the largest gathering or concentration of readers is one where, you know, it requires that kind of pushback and careful watch on the timing to make sure that it will be received as openly as possible, because the pushback on AAPI, the hate is definitely something that's been very real over the last couple of years, and it's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah?
Yeah, it's I don't know if I have an experience where like Mia mentioned the other author friend that she had, where her release it kept getting pushback, which is really frustrating. But I do recall like some other author friends of mine of Asian American background being told a couple times that something to the effect of like, oh, well, we've already acquired something from an Asian author, so we're not looking for anything more. And I don't know if that was in connection to specifically like the pandemic, or if that was just general racism that exists. Like sometimes it's hard to even discern like what is even happening. It just feels like it always does. So yeah, that's frustrating. But I also feel like, so I started publishing in 2019, and then the pandemic happened, and that kind of flipped everything on its head. And I feel like even now, because we're still technically in it, but we're trying to come out of it and stabilize, I have a hard time discerning, like, is this happening because there's a disruption, or because we're still dealing with like aftershocks from the pandemic, or is this like general bigotry that we're always navigating? I don't know, not the greatest answer, but sometimes I just find it really confusing and overwhelming, and it's hard to even know what it's coming from. It's just happening, and I'm just having to process it.
Right. And you're busy writing and doing your life, kind of thing too.
Right.
Jessie, I'm really curious about your answer to this question, because you're not in the US, so you might have a very different perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was a lot of hatred towards the Chinese people here in Indonesia. I mean, we've always had racial tensions throughout history anyway. So, obviously it became worse. And I guess I would say like the lockdown kind of helped in that sense, because, we were all just inside the house. So we didn't have to deal with like threats outside. And we were quite strict with the lockdown here in Indonesia. So yeah, I felt lucky with that. But there were definitely fears that there might be like riots or something like that, because there's like quite a huge Chinese community in Jakarta, and so we were all really scared about that happening. Luckily it didn't, but I definitely felt that there was like rising tension due to the pandemic, like here, just outside of the publishing world. Fortunately, I think for me, within the publishing world, I didn't really feel like it affected me personally, for whatever reason. I'm not sure entirely why. Because my family and I were of East Asian descent, so we all look very East Asian. So, but luckily somehow like that kind of went past me. Although yeah, I think we all, by now, we all know we have that, those unfortunate friends whose books have been like pushed back. I have a friend whose book was basically pushed back 3 years now. So it's gonna be out next year, hopefully. But it's the Chinese fantasy like mythology retelling. So I guess that's why they pushed it back. I really hope like it smashes all expectations, because she deserves the world. So yeah.
Okay. It's curious. I mean, I guess it's curious that, we in the I guess me in the US, I feel like I live in this silo and I think, oh, this is happening here, but it's actually happening everywhere for different reasons in different groups.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk to our romance writers a little bit, because I want to go back to the fluff a little bit. And I will ask a question for the mystery writers as well. But being Southeast Asian and writing romance, there's again stereotypes about like Southeast Asians being kind of repressed or anything like that. And then writing romance, like what kind of feedback do you get from your Southeast Asian readers or any readers about the spiciness of your books? And Mia, do you write romance, right? Or do you write mostly mystery?
I wrote mystery, but like it's like romantic like subplots.
Okay.
Yeah. So and I'm on a romance panel this weekend for the Boston Book Fest. So I'm like, I guess I'll talk about my love triangles that are in my murder mysteries.
That's right. I'm going to be at the Boston Book Festival, so I'm going to come find you. So I can't really remember who I ended up with, but I think I'm starting with Sarah on this question.
Overall, I've gotten a really positive response. I do every once in a while I'll get like a really annoying comment on like social media or like on Goodreads. Like I'll get a message on Goodreads about like how some random person doesn't like the level of sexy stuff happening in my books, which is weird because it's very obvious if you look at the cover and you read the blurb, they're going to have, the characters are going to have a lot of sex in my books. Like, and it's fine if you don't like this, just also no one's forcing you to read that. So why are you reading it if it bothers you? But, but overwhelmingly, it's been really, really, really positive, and I feel really lucky to have that response. People have just been so wonderful, sending me messages and DMs saying like how fun and exciting it is to read a story with a main character who looks like them, comes from the same background as them, and they're falling in love, and they're going through all the fun romance tropes in the book, and they're getting happily ever after, and they're seeing they're seeing like the cover with a character that looks like them and that they've not seen that before. And that's just, so maybe I've just been really lucky, but I've gotten really positive responses from Filipino American, Asian American people who have at least reached out to me. I'm assuming there are some who don't like it, but they have the politeness not to tell me in a DM that they hate what I do. So
readers aren't usually very shy, so if they didn't like it, they would let you know. So you're doing something right. Jessie, did you want to comment on this as well?
Yes, of course. Oh my gosh. So my mom reads all of my books, and when she read Dial A for Aunties, she was like, why are there so many kissing scenes? Like so many. And I was like, did the murder not bother you? And she was like, there was only one murder, and but there's so many like kissing scenes. And so I was like, oh, okay. So, your limit is like the one murder. And she was just like, I'm just so, like, she was like, I don't know if I should recommend it to your aunties or not. And she was really torn up about it. But finally she did recommend it to people. But when she read, that was unexpected, because it's a YA and it has, okay, sorry, I was like 4-year-old. When she read, that was unexpected, which is YA, and it has like very, okay. Yeah, I'm showing Lily. She wants me to show my dog. Okay. And the teens are very horny and they think about, sex a lot. And the guy, he's caught, um, um, doing stuff to himself. And my mom was just like, I am this close to like not finishing this book and just giving up on it. And I was like, okay, I mean, you don't have to read it, but she couldn't put it down. So I was like, so you enjoyed it, right? And she's like, no, I didn't. But she read it in 2 days. So, but this one she did not recommend to her friends. She was like, I am too embarrassed. So that's my pushback. And, I think I got off lightly there.
That's so funny. Mia, do you want to talk about your love triangle?
Yeah. Oh God, I feel like so like my mom reads all my books too, and I actually do want to write romance. I actually have 2 like romance proposals that I've been like working on and off like here and there. That I've been talking about with my agent, and I'm just like, oh God, it's gonna have to be closed door, isn't it? One, because I'm just like an extremely awkward human being. Being raised very Catholic will do that to you. But also, I'm like, oh, my mom is gonna read this. Like I know she is, and so. With cozy mystery, so people who are not familiar with the cozy mystery subgenre, I like calling them Hallmark movies with dead bodies, because cozy mysteries, what makes them cozy is that there's no graphic violence, sex, or bad language on the page, right? So even though people die, like there's not like heads getting chopped off and blood everywhere, like it's not gory at all. Romantic subplots are very common, but there are no on the page sex scenes. There's very, very rarely any sex scenes, but if they do, they're always like fade to black, closed door. The next morning they would, like that kind of a thing. But because I really like the idea of cozy mysteries just being rom-coms with dead bodies, I put a lot of like rom-com tropes, especially in the first book. The first book kind of starts with me like detailing all the shared tropes that cozies and rom-coms have. And so I actually I knew there was going to be a love interest. I didn't plan on there being a love triangle until I was trying to deepen this character more instead of just being like this random and this person is right there. And then I was just like, oh, I see where this is going. And then it kind of developed into a love triangle that's introduced in the first book. She's leaning away in the second book. She's made a decision by the third book. Although Piper, I was just like, why choose? But we'll see. Yeah.
Piper.
You almost said that like you were afraid to let me loose. So when it comes to romance, my mother also reads all of my books because she is a voracious reader. And I almost always get the storyline was very good. I don't think you needed to get that explicit. To which I'm like, I'm not sorry. I love you, mommy, but I'm not sorry. So yes, even my urban fantasy, contemporary fantasies, they get explicit, friends. So be forewarned, we get explicit. There's in-flight hankety-pankety going on. It happens, right? But because it felt natural, and also because I think, and I was recently on a panel discussing sex in fantasy. I do think that when you're talking about relationships and you're talking about romance, you don't need physical intimacy for it to be a romance. But when you do choose to include intimate moments and intimate scenes, they're really wonderful moments where you can demonstrate the character arc and the character development, where people are learning to trust each other and learning to communicate with each other. And there is nothing that requires more trust than in a moment of vulnerability where things get awkward and messy during sex, and you can actually communicate yes, I like this, or no, I don't, or I want this, which takes so much bravery and so much trust between the people involved in that moment. And trust me, it gets way more complicated the more people you add to that moment. It's really interesting to explore in romance, I think. And while I said before, you don't need physical intimacy to have a romance and to be in love and to write a love story, I personally do write romance stories that have physical intimacy because I like to explore those moments. And they're not always graceful. We get messy. We have moments of awkwardness, or we have moments of really, really painful moments where a person makes the decision to make a leap of faith in the person that they're choosing to be with. And I think that physical intimacy moments, while they're very hot and very smexy and very hankety pankety boinking, also can really be impactful when it comes to those moments and those communications and the development of a relationship. Almost always when you read a sex scene in a romance, that romantic arc is taking a step forward.
Mhm.
So yeah, mom still thinks they didn't need to be explicit to achieve that.
But I like what you said about it happens. It happens in all cultures. Obviously, otherwise that culture would die out, right? And to normalize it, to like show people in the fact that they're just doing normal things is really powerful for somebody not who never sees themselves in writing.
And that they deserve to feel good. They
Mhm.
deserve to feel good. And heck, they deserve to ask for what will make them feel good.
Mhm.
I
And
think
they
is
deserve a
super
choice,
important.
right? They
Yes.
deserve the choices. So and I think in all of your books, like people do make choices that affect them, but again, it happens in all cultures, and and that's what I think all of your books are so amazingly important in this moment, to help people understand that we're all the same, however we look, we all have the same kind of needs and humors and things like that. So I just find your book so important and wonderful. So Rachel asked this question, with Facebook, Instagram, and the rise of TikTok, Book Talk, have you seen social media affecting or impacting your publishing journey in a positive or negative way? How do you see social media being a force for good for BIPOC authors? I think I'm starting with Jessie on this one.
So I love social media, and hands down, the number one way that it has impacted my career in a positive way is to actually open me up to opportunities. So I have tweeted about writing what I'm working on, and I've had editors reach out to my agent asking, when is that thing she's working on going to be ready, and can you please put me on the sub list for that. Just really, really nice. And it's also connected me with other writers, and that's how I found my best writing buddy right now. It's through Twitter, because I was reading her book, and I kept DMing her and being like, oh my god, this is so good, please be my friend. And she couldn't get rid of me, so now we're friends. And this happened with quite a few writers, and now we're friends. And last week I just went to Singapore for the first time since the pandemic, and I met up with Lauren Ho, who's the author of Last King Standing, and we it wouldn't have happened without social media. And now we're planning girls trips for the weekends, where we're gonna be wearing cute outfits and going shopping. So I'm very, very, very excited, and it all was made possible through Twitter and Instagram. So I'm so grateful.
So you found your writing community through social media.
Yeah.
That's amazing. How about you, Mia?
And a lot of it I found through social media, Twitter especially, and also, yeah, a lot of opportunities come through Twitter. There was a call for a short story anthology that sounded so cool, but short stories are hard, and I knew there was no way I was gonna make that deadline, because it was an open call for submission. So I was never gonna make that deadline, because I was already working on edits and I had a different deadline. So I was just well, I'll retweet it and boost it because it sounded super cool. And then one of the editors of the anthology saw that I retweeted it and contacted my agent. She was like, hey, I saw Mia boosted this tweet and I really love Arsenic and Adobo. Would she be willing to contribute a story to the anthology. Like I didn't have to like try out. They were just like, would she do this? And I was like, absolutely. And it comes out next summer. It's called Fit for the Gods. It's a modern inclusive retelling of stories from Edith Hamilton's mythology. So I'm taking on the story of the Furies, but reimagining them as Filipino siblings with a detective agency in Chicago that specializes in family drama and murder and in revenge, not murder. Or is it? No, revenge. You know, it's just being like a good like literary citizen is what we say, like boosting other authors, boosting like these calls for opportunities, really connects you to other people. Because sometimes I'll just be like, this sounds like an awesome book, person I don't know. Let me scream about it on Twitter. And then they'll be like, oh, thank you for boosting. Want to be my friend? And I'm like, absolutely, because making friends as an adult is hard. And, you know, just like things like that. And then also people, because you create these, you know, connections, these people you meet recommend you for opportunities and things like that. And there's also the visibility, you know, like marketing budgets. That's a whole other story. Not huge. Particularly not because like cozy mysteries are not like the hot, sexy, you know, like we're not getting the big boost that like, you know, a domestic suspense or a thriller is going to get. So word of mouth is so important for any book really, but like in general for books like mine where people have no idea who I am. I'm very new. I write in a niche category that's not known for a younger readership. But on Instagram, someone will put my cover up and then that gets boosted and people are like, oh, what's that? That cover's really cool. And then it spread. You know, I've literally had people message me like, I don't even know what your book's about, but I've seen that cover everywhere and it's really cool. So I bought it. I'm like, you didn't even read what it was about? You have that kind of money where you can just be like, I don't know what this book's about, but I'll buy it based on the cover. Thank you, people who do that. And thank you to my cover designer for giving me such cool, but like, yeah, it's the visibility that we wouldn't normally get if we were relying solely on our publishers who are stretched very thin.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Piper?
Okay, so I am also a hybrid author in that meaning that I am published, both traditionally published, and I also publish indie projects of my own. So I have access to numbers that we sometimes wouldn't get unless we asked our traditional editors what our numbers are. And a lot of times they come slow. So it's really hard to see the direct impact of, you know, something going viral. For example, on TikTok, and the TikTok influence is real, friends. I can say that both for my books and also knowing a lot of indie romance authors who romance is amazing genre in so many ways. There's the good and the bad of it, right? Like when it comes to the authors in Romancelandia. But I will say that there is such a community of authors who are willing to be transparent and share about their numbers. It's amazing. And so I can tell you, the TikTok influence, when a book is recommended on TikTok and it goes out there and it starts to get out there, even if it's quiet, even if it doesn't go viral, it really impacts sales directly, because the people who are on BookTok, specifically the readers who are on TikTok, they put their money where the TikTok videos catch their attention. So when a reader goes, hey, did you know this book? Or hey, did you know that book? And most often it's readers telling readers they love this book, right? Even authors who are making recommendations, they're making recommendations as a reader who was like, this is delicious. This book was fantastic. This book I'm so looking forward to, right? That enthusiasm really comes across well in BookTok, as well as Instagram stories, as well as Instagram reels. And because that enthusiasm comes through, it really does heavily impact, from a readership perspective, book sales. It does. And so if you're on TikTok and you decide to shout out our books and you decide to hashtag it and you put it out there, even if it doesn't go viral, it's a slow, quiet spread. And it has an impact, possibly more directly than any of the other social media platforms at this time. TikTok sells books through the author community and because we like to recommend each other stuff, but the spike is not as significant as TikTok is currently or over the last 2 years, right? Facebook, unless you're into Facebook ads, not so much, right? Like the sharing around Facebook is a different environment, right? Instagram used to be really big, especially for the bookstagrammers who would post their pictures of books and things like that. I think it's still very impactful for certain genres, but again, not as sharp an uptick or a direct correlation, as direct a correlation as TikTok is currently when you look at the data. So that, I hope, is part of my answer, that yes, social media does impact sales directly. And then to Mia and Sarah and Jesse's point, like the writing community and the interaction with writing community and not being alone, and also word of mouth is hugely valuable.
Thank you. I did start with you on that question, Sarah, didn't I? Or did you get a chance to answer?
I don't know. Sorry, I don't know. If not, this just came to my head though. I think social media is 100% like, well, it's great overall, but like I will say that on the a little bit negative side of it, I like book talk is great, like Piper said, to like in seeing the correlation between like this is trending on book talk, this is huge, and now I can see like a boost in sales in my books or whatever. I did want to bring up that it can be bad too, because not that long ago, maybe a couple months ago, there was this thing going on, and I think it started on TikTok, about how you can read ebooks on Amazon and return them, and you're essentially just like stealing from the author. So like that went viral and cost a lot of indie authors money in sales. So yes, TikTok, social media, it's great, but they also have like downsides too, I think, and something like that where it is impacting your sales as an author, and it feels like somebody's stealing from you, even though they were allowed to do that for a while. And I think Amazon changed some stuff so that it's not easy to do that anymore, but like that, I think that started on book talk, TikTok, not to drag it down, just like that is a negative thing that happened that I remember was really frustrating for a lot of authors to deal with. So hopefully stuff like that isn't overlooked in addition to like all the great things that TikTok and social media can do too. So that's all I wanted to add.
Well, that's really important, is that they have its pros and cons. So we're actually just about out of time. And I'm just going to ask you really quickly to recommend another book by a Southeast Asian author that is not here on our panel. And I'm going to start with Mia. Oh, you know what? When you first come in, now we can hear you.
Oh, can you hear me again? Okay. Geez, one by. So a lot of the Southeast, especially last week was the Filipino American International Book Festival in San Francisco, which, first of all, the fact that there were enough Filipino authors to host an entire festival, like I was gonna cry. It was so amazing to be part of. So I'm just like, oh geez, I'm trying to think of everyone there. So there is a recent release that just came out, I want to say like a week or so ago. It's a middle grade novel called Marikit and the Ocean of Stars, I believe, by Carice. Oh geez, there's three names. I think Avendaño Cruz is the author's name. It's her debut, and it incorporates Filipino mythology, and so being able to see these books that like I would have killed for as young Mia, because I originally thought I was going to be a fantasy author, or particularly a middle grade fantasy author, before I started writing mystery, because those are the books that captured my attention the most when I was younger. So being able to see our culture and mythology in a mainstream, Big Five published book, and to think of all the kids who are going to get to see themselves in ways that I didn't get to see, means so much to me. So yeah, definitely Marikit and the Ocean of Stars. Oh, you only said one, right? I'll be nice.
You can send me a list later if you'd like.
Yeah. I'll be nice and leave time for other people.
Oh, this part is so hard because it's like, picking your favorite. Piper.
Okay.
I saw you looking at your phone, so you obviously looking this up.
So, well, I just wanted to make sure I had the title right. I would say another Southeast Asian author's book that I'm super excited about is Aliette de Bedard's The Red Scholar's Wake. Oh my gosh. So Aliette de Bedard is a colleague of mine. She's Vietnamese French, and she writes, I need to double check Aliette's pronouns, but in the meantime, Aliette writes amazing science fiction and fantasy, and it is queer and it's fantastic. And one of the things that I love about The Red Scholar's Wake is that it's science fiction, but it's also fantasy in a lot of ways. And it's like like I'm not even sure anymore. All I know is that it's gorgeous and it's beautiful. And also I have never ever imagined that anyone could write a sex scene between a lesbian and a spaceship in a way that works so well. Like, talk about hankety panky. That's a little bit bonkers, and I didn't know you could make it work, but it works in the midst of this epic, fantastic story. So, The Red Scholar's Wig by Aliette de Bedard, not just for the hankety panky scene, but I mean, I'm super impressed with how she made that work. And the rest of it is just incredibly beautiful to read.
Well, you just told me on it. Usually when I have a romance author panel, I ask for especially fantasy or sci-fi, what is that book? The Water for Chocolate or whatever book, The Shape of Water, how do the two aliens have, get together? But I'll read about that. If you want to put a link for that in the chat, we would love it. Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, so there is a Filipino-American author. Her name is Elle Cruz, and she wrote this amazing romance that I love. It's called How to Survive a Modern Day Fairy Tale. And it's just a really fun, sexy, fluffy romance about just this ordinary woman, and she's just living her life in Southern California, and she crosses paths with this super good looking billionaire, and they have just an instant connection, and he kind of just sweeps her off her feet. And it's like, it's ridiculous, but in a good way, because like my fantasy is to be like swept off of my feet by a billionaire, even though I'm happily married. But I mean, like, that's my husband's fantasy too, so he can't say anything against that. It's just really fun to see like a story where like someone who is from the same background as me is like the star of this, ridiculously fluffy, sexy romance, and she gets the most glorious happily ever after. It's just a really, really fun read. Highly recommend.
Thank you. If you want to put a link in the chat for that, I would definitely send that out to everybody who registered today. Jessie, how about you?
Well, I just, like I mentioned, I spent time with Lauren Ho last week. So, her book is like at the top of my mind. It's called Last Tang Standing. And she just released her second book, which is Lucy E is Not a Romantic. And they're both set in Singapore, and they're just so unapologetically like Singaporean. When I read Last Time Standing, I couldn't stop being like, oh my God, like I totally, this is how I grew up. This is like the color, and so it's really good, and it's so funny. And I was just talking to my niece because she wants to be an author, and I was like, oh, can you tell me more like about the book you're working on? What are some of like the comp titles? And she was like, oh, like Last Tang Standing. And I was like, you're not even gonna like say my books? And she was like, and also your books. But too late, niece. So that's how good her books are, that my own family has betrayed me. So highly recommend.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Although I'm really interested in the book that you had mentioned is coming out next year from your friend who you said has been delayed for so long. So I'll be looking for that too. So
oh yeah, that's The Water Outlaws by S.L. Huang.
Oh, okay. I will write that down. So thank you so much for being here with us tonight. This has been really wonderful. Just such a great conversation and very uplifting and interesting. So I appreciate your time and your thoughtfulness and your sense of humor, because it kind of gets us through. So thank you everybody for being here tonight with us. I really appreciate that as well. And I will send out a recap with the video link to everybody who was here and registered. And I hope you just run out and get books from these authors. You can buy them signed from Bank Square Books. And again, everybody have a wonderful night. Thank you so much again, authors, for spending your time with us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.
Bye.